the things that we're trying to do is democratize access to supply chain data. That's simply all it is. And it hasn't been done before because before it's been really hard. Machine learning nowadays with AI, it makes it a little bit easier, and that's what we're leveraging.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey, folks, we're in for another show of SimplyTrade Podcast, and we have some great discussions coming on today. And I'm going to jump right in and let Cindy DeLeon, who has been on our show before, and she is going to introduce our next guest here.
Thank you, Andy, and it's a pleasure to be able to make this introduction for someone that I respect just a great deal and I've worked with. This is Dr. Shawn Bhimani. He is a professor with Northeastern University in Boston of supply chain management. And Shawn has extensive experience in supply chain management as well as in forced labor, two words that you guys have heard a ton about in the very recent past. I want to also introduce the true, shining light of this next hour, and that is going to be SimplyTrade. And if you have not gone to SimplyTrade.org, you're missing out. And SimplyTrade is an accessible, open, free platform that exposes potential risks in global supply chain. It is in its pilot phase, and I'm going to say this, it focuses right now on the apparel sector. So if you're not in the apparel sector and you're going in and looking for semiconductors or for PVC flooring or something like that, you're not in the right place right now. It's in the apparel sector, but I really encourage you to go in there anyway because it helps you understand what supply chain tracing is about and the power of automation in this space and software. So this software was developed with the leadership of Dr. Bhimani, and he speaks a lot on this topic. I, Cindy DeLeon, personally am one of their advisory board members to SimplyTrade, and it's just a joy to be able to help in any small way I can. So with that, I will leave you in the capable hands of Shawn.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Cindy. All right. Welcome aboard to our show here, Shawn.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be here.
So SimplyTrade, that is an interesting thing. Is it an organization? Is it a company? Or what? Give us a little bit of background here, what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, first of all, for having me, Andy. And also want to just say thank you to Cindy for that wonderful introduction, but also all the support she gives us from DeLeon Trade on how we can build this out. Answering your question, SimplyTrade is the first open access website that anywhere can go to trace supply chains, to see where stuff comes from. It's never existed before. There's a lot of for-profit companies that do this, at least a couple of dozen of them, but it's the first one that is open to everyone everywhere. And specifically, it's a research project based at Northeastern University in our supply chain department, but really it's developing partnerships all over the world. And so I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Excellent. Excellent. So, all right, to our listeners, in particular, you need to look at this because Cindy mentioned that it is right now somewhat isolated to the apparel industry. Are there plans, before we I make my comment, are there plans to add other industries or commodity type things for this type of endeavor?
Absolutely. Yeah. So on the back end of SimplyTrade, we're well equipped with tens of millions of shipping records for every product that enters the United States. Right now, we're only showing apparel because that was our pilot to see if we could do it well. Once we've now finished apparel, which just launched 3 months ago, we're going to now move on to include other industries, open those up, all that supply chain shipping data, bills of lading, supply chain records. but also expand our geographies. So not only looking at China, which is where the pilot is, but looking at other countries and how they ship into the US and highlighting the risk of those shipments that are coming into right now the US, but also to other markets.
All right. So here to my audience, or to our audience, excuse me. This is one of those that, all right, we're starting with the apparel industry, but this is something that if you're in other industries, you need to be aware of what's happening and the development in this so that you can look at and vet your products. This is part of the scenario here that we've talked about. There's the denied party, restricted party screening and all that kind of stuff for individuals and transactions. This is focused on the products then themselves, of where it's being made, the raw materials to the final products and all of that, so that when your product comes in, you're not going to have it seized or rejected or whatever at the borders or get yourself into a problem. So this is a smart way. This is a way of working smarter, not harder, in vetting your products. Would that be a good statement there, Shawn?
I think that's a great way of putting it. Smarter, not harder. We developed this for a lot of reasons, but one of the top three is because a lot of trade people were staying up trying to figure out which of my shipments might be risky. And that includes some of my colleagues. And so this was really developed for them. This is the platform I wish they would have had for years, but also the platform I wish I would have had when I worked in procurement and sourcing. It just never existed. And so we said, we got to build it.
All right. So to that extent, all right, Renee, I'm going to come to you. And by the way, folks, Lalo is traveling right now. So Renee Cuccarelli is my co-host here for today. And she's so phenomenal. Got a great background here and the experience. So Renee, I want to ask you a question here regarding when you're dealing with your past companies that you were dealing with. Did you ever get into actively working with the procurement folks in sourcing products and saying, yeah, no, this is, you may find a good price there, but that's, it's against the law or regulations or whatever? Or did you always have it like being the pooper scooper at the end of the parade, cleaning it up after it got here?
I think it was both. I mean, my first job with Homedics, I think everybody probably had one of our massagers. We saturated the market back in the early 2000s, but we were very important team, trade and customs at Homedics, because our product life cycle was very short and quick, and they needed to know our duty rates. They were very strategic when they were, engineering products, which was, I thought, awesome, ahead of the game, pioneers. So they would bring us in the room. And yes, so in that situation, we were involved in some of the procurement decisions, and especially obviously if it had to do with duty or AD/CVD or, but some other companies that got larger, I walked for multinational billion-dollar organizations, and that was a little bit different. It's a little bit more separate. So in that case, we developed these task force that we've talked about on the show a million times, or, advisory committees that included all the proper departments: engineering, forecasting, logistics, procurement. So that's how we got involved in the larger corporations. But it's so important.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, it's so important. What?
It's so important to get to, like we talked about in many of our podcasts, develop these relationships. And it's so exciting that this Northeastern and Shawn, you guys developed a tool that's open and, like Cindy said, free, because you're at a loss for words when these new regulations come in. You don't know where to turn. And so if you have this committee, then you have the opportunity to brainstorm and then look in the tool and, see what you can find out and then mitigate your risk. And I don't know, Shawn, do you guys have a demo options so let's say I'm new in the trade and I want to go to your website, but I'm not sure how to start. Is there?
There are. We have some guides on how to use it. We also have a couple of video recordings on YouTube to watch and make sure that people know how to navigate.
Oh, cool. We can put that in the show notes.
Shawn, the question I've got for you now is, what about the users here who, initially is going in to look at this? Is like, are you at some point, I guess the different levels of management should be involved. But this sounds like something that if it's free to use, that's one thing. But who are your main users right now with your tool here?
Everyone should have access to risk data. To answer your question, C-suite absolutely is thinking about this because of laws, but really everyone that reports to them, everyone who is interested, trade professionals, auditors, everyone should have access to the same level of risk data. One of the things that we're trying to do is democratize access to supply chain data. That's simply all it is. And it hasn't been done before because before it's been really hard. Machine learning nowadays with AI, it makes it a little bit easier. And that's what we're leveraging to build a lot of the supply networks that we have in SimplyTrade. But really, it's for everyone anywhere. And in particular, and this is again coming from my corporate background in procurement and sourcing, it's for small and medium-sized companies really that can afford these high-priced tools. Nothing wrong with high-priced tools. I think they do a good job, but many companies can't afford them. And a lot of trade people can't get to their systems. And so this is for the majority of people who have just been locked out. And to Renee's point, where do you start when it comes to this new law, new legislations? It gives people a first step on building out supply chain transparency and understanding what their risk might be.
All right. So here's where I'm going with this, though, is that first off, Renee, I love, even in a big company, small company, medium, whatever, you're going to have, or you should have, call it a committee, logistics, sourcing group, whatever it is, supply chain group. And that's where you're going to take it. It's like, all right, we got a new product. We're going to go through and we're talking about it and whatever, and then be able to maybe use this tool to pull up and start looking at information. And from that, there'll be, you know what, we need to dig into this a little bit more or whatever, but maybe show that. But at some point, before you get to that, somebody needs to become proficient in this. And it sounds like it really should be more along the lines of the procurement folks, but there's got to be, and I'm talking initially, your procurement and I guess I would say the import-export compliance group that should be joined at the hip to say, hey, we got this new product, let's look at it. And then from there, you can take it to your supply chain committee kind of thing. Would that be a good approach, Shawn, do you think?
I think that's a great approach. Oftentimes when I do trainings on forced labor compliance and supply chains, it's geared towards those procurement, sourcing, but also professionals that are mostly helping companies with trade compliance and understanding where their risks might be. And that's not just from a private perspective. That's also public procurement. So government buying, all sorts of different types of organizations that are purchasing internationally. They have these people, to your point, that really, let me run you through a scenario. A new law gets passed, UFLPA, or the recent European Union due diligence laws. And some procurement person gets a visit from their manager and has a piece of paper on their desk. And that piece of paper says, here are the new requirements from legal, make it happen. Where do they start? Well, what is the first step to make that happen? Because forced labor isn't a training I got when I started in procurement. Now we've developed it, but it wasn't there before. And as the world changes, to your point, it's not only these cross-functional teams that need to be looking at it, but it's also how do we build out standardized training across the industry to make this accessible so people can speak the language that the laws are speaking.
Yeah. And to that point, I guess, Renee, with your background again, any thoughts that what Shawn was just talking about here? Cause it sounds like, man, this is rich. This actually, talking about it and checking things out, it sounds, oh, okay, yeah, it's just another step. Actually, the implications here to me sound like astronomical if you do it, that it's really going to avoid problems if you do this right on the front end.
I mean, let's face it. What people don't realize is trade customs is in front of the supply chain. I know we're talking about procurement, but we need to be in front with procurement. with engineering. That's kind of like what I was talking about with Homedics. We were tariff engineering. We were source engineering. So if you're in front and you have these steps, you have a code of compliance, you have a policy, you have all the stakeholders with their opinions and their diverse needs and requirements. So that what we forget about when we get stuck in our own group is, oh, wait, we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about that. Now you keep everybody together and then you do a step-by-step review, and then continuous improvement, right? So you do it once, you got to do it twice, you got to do it 3 times, maybe so I think that step 1, you need to get in front. Step 2, it has to be continuous. Step 3, we need tools, we need information, and we need data. And, having an open platform is phenomenal. And it'll, like to your point, Andy, it'll avoid the forced labor there's many complications to the trade environment now and possible penalties and risk and ramifications. And, you guys were talking about training. I mean, Shawn fortunately, I work for a training company. No.
Just so happened.
No. But, forced labor, we're doing a course. We're going to be promoting this course and we already starting in August. And it was a lot to put a course together. So there's even people who are researching it, and putting data down and trying to inform and educate our trade and logistics and procurement folks. Things are changing. Congress is coming up with updates, right? I mean, so there's advocacy groups and there's so much going on. It's exciting, but it's a lot to stay ahead. So we need a lot of people. It's not a one-man show. Yeah.
And I agree. It's like, you've got to become proficient. Somebody needs to become the expert on forced labor prevention, I think. And with that, not only the knowledge, then also become proficient in the different tools out there. So Shawn, let's come back. Talk to us a little bit now. So how does your system work? Where's the raw data coming from that your system is tapping into?
Yep, these are maritime shipments right now coming into the U.S. One of the big things that we try to be is a historical record as well, not just what's happening today, but for the last decade, which companies have brought what products into the U.S. And so when you go to supplytrace.org, you can search for any apparel company, and soon that'll unlock to other industries and see from 2014 to 2024, what have they brought in and where in the world does it come from? It's kind of like a traffic light system. You have green dots that show you the places around the world where we don't have any risk cataloged, yellow dots where there might be some risk, and red dots where we have evidence that there's something going on that deserves more due diligence. And you can see that for all countries, but you'll see a lot of red dots right now for any violations for the UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. You'll see that front and center. And as we expand, just want to put this teaser out there for the audience on the podcast. It won't just be forced labor. Forced labor will always be there, but we're going to add on additional risk indicators, whether that's related to climate or other risks as well. So I just want to give that little teaser out there.
What about ownership, Shawn, of ownership? Will that be added?
Yeah, so we actually have ownership and subsidiary data on the back end. SimplyTrade isn't just shipping records. It's actually a team of investigators. Some of them are actually victims of either oppression or their families are currently victims of human rights abuses. We support them in providing data onto the platform that they research and investigate. And they look at corporate ownership, subsidiaries, joint ventures across regions.
Okay, awesome. Let me ask you something else. Do you have any importers that have been under a detention situation, whether it's a WRO or UFLPA, where they've used your SimplyTrade successfully, not maybe gotten out of the detention, but were able to gain information and bring clarity? Have they come back and said, "Oh my gosh, this is what we found"?
Yes. And some of those were actually some of our early beta testers. So before we launched in March, we had beta testers from companies, some of which that had detention issues. Some of them were government. Some of them were small companies that just needed a place to start. And a lot of other types of beta testers that told us, what does the platform need to do to make it super simple to create supply chain transparency? And so, yeah, we had all sorts of folks on there.
Good to know. Okay, great. And then let's go ahead. And so tell us the future. Like you said, you're going to bring in more geography. You're going to bring in additional countries and manufacturers and suppliers. And so I need to look at the program. I can't wait to see it. Tell us what the best thing you think that the importers can gain from this.
Absolutely.
The future.
Yeah, the new future. I study. This is a little bit of a story. I study supply chain history, so I understand not only how supply chains work because that's my passion, but I understand how supply chains started 100+ years ago in war. Supply chain management was born out of war supply chains, logistics, transportation, and ever since those days, we've had laws against the types of things that we're talking about, whether it's forced labor or otherwise. It's just never been possible before to create supply chain transparency in a scaled, easy to access way. It's never been possible because we didn't have the computing power. Now that we do, honestly, I think everything changes from here. And this is just the beginning of not only our platform, but an entire space where software providers are trying to fill this gap. We just happen to be the only open one that makes it accessible to everyone. And that includes not only what are industries and countries doing, but how does that relate to legislation, due diligence, procedures. We provide free resources on our site about what kind of laws people should be thinking about, looking for. And as we move forward as a platform that's open to the world, also making it a little bit easier to do things at scale. So instead of searching one by one, and let me take a step back and say, if you've ever used a search engine, if you've ever used Google Maps or anything to find something on a website, you know how to use SimplyTrade. It's as simple as going to supplytrace.org and all you see is a map right when you search for something, and you can actually see the risk right there. The goal is to keep making it as simple as using GPS on your phone. It's as simple as that, to track things and where they're going. Not make it complicated. There's not too much data. Just keep it simple. And as we scale, I think we're just going to keep making it easy to use, but with significantly more data. And that's the key part, is we'll just keep unlocking data. Every month you'll see it expand.
That's awesome. The user friendliness. Because I mean, even me, I'm sitting here trying to get my mic to work, and Andy's like, Renee, do this, turn it up. And I'm like, what? So it's good to have the simplicity for that. And the evolution, to your point, Shawn, on the procurement and supply chain tracing is just phenomenal where we're going. I like the fact that we might be able to get down to tier 3, 4. I mean, you know, the companies didn't worry about that.
Well, and here's something that I think that comes into play. You're saying that all, different levels, different positions, different departments should have access to this kind of information, which is great. But let's talk a little bit about the C-suite. Is that they're not going to get down to the granular level, I don't think. I guess it would be more of looking at, like you were saying, the maps and of where the yellow and red dots are and things of that nature, so that from a strategic perspective, who they're doing business with and where they're sourcing their goods would come into play if they're looking at the maps on there. Would that be a fair assessment, or how's the C-suite going to use the system?
I think that's part of it, is just having a pulse check. Where's my supply chain and what does it look like? Supply chain mapping used to be hard. It's not anymore. Supply chain mapping can be done in a few clicks. Yep. It just takes a lot of computing power, but they can look at their entire supply chain in one glance and see the risk by region. Also, let's say there's someone who is in a legal department or trade compliance department who finds a red dot. Because our platform is open to everyone, she can literally copy and paste that link, that website URL, and send it to legal, send it to their trade partner, send it to whoever, and everyone can see the exact same data. They don't need to subscribe. They don't need to do anything. They can just log in and see the exact same risk. And to me, that's the beauty of democratization, is that nothing is stuck behind a paywall. It's open, and the C-suite can get the same link. They can see that and say, oh, that's the red dot we're worried about. They don't have to worry about logging into a fancy paywall system.
Okay, so to that, I love where you're going with this because it's making it easy for the people involved in this to inform their senior leadership, which is phenomenal, or, whomever in this. So Renee, let me come back to you as we're talking through on this, is if you're looking at some of these things and all that, have you ever had to walk through a process, if you will, with some senior leadership on, here's an example. We're just going to take a commodity. Let me show you what some of the risks are involved in this, and we'll just talk through it real quick. You don't have a whole lot of time, so you're obviously going to have to hit it quick. But have you ever had to go through that, and having a tool like this would make your job easier?
Gosh. Well, I can tell you, I used to sit in the CEO's office of Teledyne, and he would say to me, Renee, I want 2-word answers. And I'd just start sweating. What do you mean? Plus, I'm a talker. And so I'm thinking, how am I going to explain all these complex trade laws and analysis to him in 2 words? So to your point, Andy, you have literally minutes in front of senior leadership. So the simplicity is so important. And for us too, because we have to take complex data and simplify it. I mean, that's actually one of trade logistics, compliance, customs people main role, simplification.
Well, but here's to your point, and I think that is so phenomenal because it's like, our job should be to simplify this, but here's the response I would get from a lot of my and tenured staff too on this. But they need to know all those details. It's like, and I would go back and go, no, it's your job to have the details. You need to translate that into what specifically is the action that you're looking for them to take. Well, they just need to be informed. Sorry, your job is to be informed. It's like, okay, here's a red flag. We need to stop this, or we need to be cautious, or we need your support to go and check this out and engage other departments. Is that fair? Or
I think that's fair. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I mean, we need to your point, when you're in the depth and the weeds of managing this supply chain tracing and mapping, we know the details, but our role is to take it up and tell the company what's the risk and how am I going to mitigate it? I mean, it's really just 2 questions. Where's all the risk and how do you plan to mitigate it? And that's got to be in short form too.
And Shawn, it sounds like your tool is going to be right there it will empower those that are trying to communicate a message that it's like, look here, or and you can see it for yourself and let them play with it and whatnot, I guess, in that sense, right?
Yeah. Can I break down one of the silos though in this conversation? So we're talking inside of a company. So we have a leader who wants to know what's going on the ground. But now let's compare that to, what does CBP have access to? What data do they have? Because like last year, the government of Canada invited me to come and talk to their supply base and about supply chain transparency. This is before we launched SimplyTrade. And a question I got over and over was, well, government has access to all the data that I don't. How do I know what they're looking at? How do I know what CBP is going to do next? Because I don't have equal access to them. So if we think about it as breaking down barriers between government and companies, whatever the C-suite can see is the same thing that an employee can see. And it should be the same thing that CBP can see. It should be the same thing that a journalist can see. Because if everyone has access to the exact same risk data, then really there's no reason not to know. It opens up the door for open conversations, not across the company, but across trade networks. The entire trade network should have access to the same data. And that to me is the novelty here, is that we're not thinking internally anymore, or not just internally. We're now thinking, well, actually everyone can see our stuff. Everyone can now see where it's coming from. What do we need to do about that? And that's, I think, the next step.
Well, to that point, I guess that's one thing that is, we're looking at this. I will say this from a C-suite perspective. I always make this recommendation, and you tell me if I don't know how well it's received at times, but I know that the companies that have implemented this have really done a phenomenal job in not only ensuring compliance, but also helping to reduce cycle times. And that's this, is that from a C-suite, there should be shared objectives or goals that are tied to the bonuses. So in other words, the procurement needs to have shared goals with the compliance and the transportation logistics folks, and vice versa. They all share so that you're dependent. Part of my goal would be, our objective would be tied to, let's say, the procurement, the logistics, or the compliance, whatever role I'm playing in that. In that shared deal, it gives the incentive to say, you know what, I'm tired of you guys arguing. I don't care who's in, it's like kids in the other room fighting. I don't care who started it. You're all in trouble. And now it's like there's an incentive. We're going to pull together and make this work. Would be a good approach, Shawn?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I see happening in companies that I work with as well. It's also taking a step back and just saying, at a very foundational level, all of you need to map the supply chain. We need to know what our supply chain looks like. We need to know what at the base, where things are. And then based off of existing risk from our map that we can see on a visual, where do we need to focus our energies? And then, hey, you from this department, you're focused on this part. For procurement, you're focused on the vetting. And quality assurance, you're following up and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. That all starts with that fundamental, I got to know where my stuff's coming from, because CBP and other countries are telling me that. But also, if I do this right, then I can better understand where I need to focus my energy internally. But to your point, Andy, I also know where my competitors are also focusing their energies. I know what countries they're in, and I need to also keep a lookout to make sure that we don't have also overlapping risk across supply networks, because that's also a single point of failure. And there's so many things involved in that, but it all comes down to mapping the supply chain and creating accountability.
We talked about a lot of stuff. So the final, takeaways for us, final thoughts: map your supply chain. I like Andy's idea, shared goals, across departments. What do you say the other just so that when people end the podcast, they're like, you know what, these are the 3 or 4 things I need to do.
Well, somebody needs to become proficient in looking at supply trace. So in accessing the system, and in 2 departments in particular that I see. First would be procurement, or sourcing. That I think would be phenomenal. But the second would be potentially the compliance. Those 2 departments could have so much influence on so many others, but those 2 right there together, working together, could be phenomenal as far as the impact and effectiveness within a company.
Yeah. So map, no supply trace, open account, awesome platform. Check it out. Shared goals.
Supply trace will map it for you. That saves you the first step.
That's awesome. And anything else that they should take away, Shawn, that we didn't? I mean, there's so much we discussed, but.
So one key takeaway is this is just the beginning, not only of supply trace, but of regulation on trade. We're going to see this come and go as we think about how politics plays a role in regulation, how the ways in which certain countries are put on the list, certain actors, certain industries. This is just the beginning. And the fact that we now have access to high performance computing that allows for us to track this in real time is the game changer for everyone, not just for CBP, who's trying to enforce this and the laws that are coming down the pike, but for companies so that they can be ready for it. They can be ahead of the curve and say, actually, I don't want to have to clean up afterward. I want to just get ahead of the ball and just get on with the work, the good stuff that we came here to do. No one in a company wants to buy or procure products made with forced labor. It's not a thing. It's just before they didn't have a place to start. With supply trace, they do. I can spend 2 minutes blowing your mind on a demo, but that's all it takes is 2 minutes to understand. It's as simple as doing a quick search and looking at the traffic light. Green dots, good. Red dots, bad. Let's make change.
All right. Well, with that, I want to say we're going to have to wrap this up for now. But folks, let me tell you, go to YouTube. There's some demos there you mentioned earlier. Look at ways of utilizing supply chains to check it out. We'll have the contact information links with our show notes. But with that, look at ways to work smarter, not harder, in dealing with this overall supply chain. There's a lot of new regulations, a lot of restricted parties, a lot of different things. Well, this helps you and it empowers you and your team to make sure that you have the confidence you're doing the right things, or there's areas here that you need to take action. So, Shawn, man, I'll tell you what, thank you so much. You have been great to talk with, and Renee, you have as well. It's like you two are both are just phenomenal. Run circles around me as far as your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks for having us on. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Folks, have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. SimplyTrade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by SimplyTrade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.